Thank you very much to the moderator, to fellow panelists, and a very good morning to everybody that's here today. With much appreciation to the organizers of this forum, it's my pleasure to be able to engage. Just looking at some of the issues that have been a bit more recent in the way international trade works and in the way that international supply chains are beginning to see certain shifts. We begin to see a world, just picking up from where Excellency Ambassador Kimani left from, whereby the fundamentals of international trade as we know it are beginning to have certain shifts. And it's very important for Africa, UAE, and the rest of the world to ensure that as this happens, they are able to continue being part of key value within these chains. So what is happening? I think we are seeing situations, for example, in the United States, whereby there are a number of structural pressures that are making trade a bit more contentious. If you look at some of these things, they're structural in nature. You basically have debt. You basically have interest rates that are still very high. You have displaced jobs because of unchecked offshoring and that kind of stuff. And this basically, in my view, would continue for some time, regardless of shifts in who basically is in office, for example. If you look at Europe, you basically also see very strong traditional economies that are also facing new pressures. Demographic challenges, by the way, are also creating pressures around how sourcing and business is done. And also issues around competitiveness are beginning to become a worry there. And therefore, these are also affecting the perception towards trade and how that happens. I think that when you look at the rest of the world, the UAE and Africa as well, we need to be able to adjust and react to ensure that even as the globe is moving ahead on some of these changes, we are part of that conversation. And what does being part of that conversation mean? We need to keep track of how global supply chains are working and changing, and we need to ensure that we are competitive enough to be able to participate in that. What will that need for us to do? We need to ensure that we are very sharp on trade policy, negotiate trade agreements smartly, and be able to see that when the multilateral system is adjusting, we need to make sure that our interests are there. And finally, I would think that policy without action, investment is nothing. And for that, we need to ensure that the UAE and Africa work a bit more closely together to ensure that emerging opportunities in things like renewable energy, in AI, in digital trade, in logistics and so forth are actually leading to tangible investments that make sure that we're able to get that premium within the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Most exciting state with discussion time. I mean, what is going to type of what we really perspective? I don't know, price means, but what's comparing from trade policies and trade negotiations is good as well, only is on settling up. And I question, keeping like policies and regulations and all that, and need to accelerate the trade investment books across one view.
Thank you, Dr. Yamiana, Your Excellency, distinguished guests. First of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation for the hospitality we had here in Ethiopia. This is my first time visiting Ethiopia, but I hope this not will be the last. For the UAE, we emerge as a growing economy. We have came a long way since 60 years. And from a country that probably didn't exist on the map, for most people, we've emerged to be the 28 or the 29 biggest GDP in the world. And we're going to go from there. We try to look into, let's say, reliable partners in the coming years. And I think Ethiopia is one of them. For the UAE, it's the biggest investor in the African continent. And why is that? Because we see that the African continent has a huge potential in the future. It has the biggest, let's say, young population anywhere in the world. It's going to exceed even Asia in terms of the population, of the total population of any other continent. And there's a huge potential in growth. For us, Africa has a huge potential since it has a lot of mineral resources and it has a lot of different diversity. In terms of the investment here in Africa for the UAE, we have over $110 billion in investment. 70 billion of that is in energy and green economy. That tells you that the UAE is focusing on exporting the know-how to other places of the world that haven't had the right, let's say, infrastructure that is suitable for them. I think the biggest selling point for the UAE is the know-how and the logistics of all of that. That the UAE is willing to share its know-how to other places around the world and build reliable partners. For us, Ethiopia, I think it has to be the role model of the UAE-Africa relationship. And that's for us very important. If you see that there's a different kind of policies, as you mentioned it, Damiana, policies are the best way to grow an economy. If you see the trade between, for example, only Dubai and Ethiopia, it had grown over 200% last year alone. Why is that? It's because of policies. We have signed with Ethiopia the currency swap policy. And so you have Ethiopian companies could invest in the UAE with minimal requirement. And the currency of, let's say, Ethiopia could be used in UAE and vice versa. And only that kind of policy will grow, the trade between the two nations. I think from this, let's say, panel, we could also propose other policies as well. For example, we have the CEPA agreement with different countries that is led by the UAE. We have over 30 CEPA negotiations with 30 countries, and Ethiopia should be one of these countries because there's a huge potential between the two nations. We have over 1,600 companies only in Dubai from Ethiopia. And we have a lot of investment here in Ethiopia as well. As an example, we have 2 renewable energy plants here in Ethiopia. One of them is the Mustadam solar project. It has over 500 megawatts, only that project. Also, there's another project called the Aish 1. It's a windmill project in Ethiopia as well. And that tells you that the UAE is investing heavily in energy security of Ethiopia. And we'd like to see these kind of projects growing in the future. And having an agreement such as CEPA will allow other companies to come to Ethiopia from the UAE and will allow also exporters from Ethiopia to have a better market reach for the products of Ethiopia. I see that growing, partnership between Ethiopia and the UAE is going to grow from here. And this event is going to assist in that kind of prosperity and sustainability between the two nations.
And you're so very much relaxed, be calm, on this. Things are touring, you're usually surrounded by people in national relations. And I'm, work on this for once, and we are all grateful this panel. And this right, I'm sorry, I'm Syria again. We went a couple of years ago at the Daniel Secret and Antlady, very familiar in film.
Yes, that's correct.
Very hard with it. And we like it us from this live there, institutional checking. But anyhow, just reflect how can both African and Emirati institutions collaborate to build this background for the skills from the innovation to capital that's technical communications.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Addis. I think it's my turn to welcome you. You welcomed me very well 2 years ago to Abu Dhabi. So I'm seeing some of my old friends in front of me. I think that's your idea. So yes, I'm coming from the UNECA. And I spend quite a lot of my time right now working on the African Continental Free Trade Area in particular. And I think there are a few things that I can say about the Africa-UAE relations. The first thing I think is, my fellow panelists just mentioned one very interesting point, that the UAE is now the 20th largest economy by GDP in the world. I think there is a huge inspirational value in that. In Africa, yes, we have the resources, we have the demography, we have everything that it takes for us to succeed. what we are lacking, what we have been lacking so far, is the scale that is necessary for us to capitalize on those advantages that we have, the natural advantages that we have. We inherited a large number of small and fragmented markets. And since the creation of the OAU in 1963 in this very city, we have been talking about regional integration. And finally, I think we are now on the verge of realizing that with the African Continental Free Trade Area. So, and what does that mean for the kind of issue that we are talking about here? What it means for me is Africa is no longer, lacking the platforms through which to coordinate, develop its common positions, and negotiate with other powers, speaking as one. And that, I think, is a very important point. The ambassador laid it out earlier very, very well. Look at the turbulence that's going on globally in trade policy. When the US government introduced the tariffs, the so-called Liberation Day tariffs in April last year, the first thing that we did in the ECA was, now, what does it mean for us as other continent? We have to deploy ourselves to understand it and see what, policy options, policy proposals, policy recommendations we should put on the table for the continent. You look at the multilateral trading system. I'm one of those people who have been writing about the WTO system, criticizing it for all sorts of its problems and everything. And all of a sudden, even that problematic institution is in danger of irrelevance. And of course, one thing I know for as a matter of principle is, yes, a bad WTO would be better than a no WTO for Africa, for example. So how do we make sure that we keep it, but also we work towards perfecting it better, as we go? You have the bilateral relations that we have with other powers, and this is where I think some of the lessons that can come out for the relationship with the UAE. We have unilateral preferences that have been available for many of us, and then we see they can be taken away at will, without even bothering to consult the beneficiaries that have been building their futures on the back of those unilateral preferences. Or some of the benefits that you have been expecting to come out of that, they can be undermined by measures in the name of the environment, this and that, such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism and so on and so forth. And then, whatever you have been building, all of a sudden, you don't have a market for it. So how do we ensure that whatever relationship we are trying to build, it is based on negotiated agreements, it's based on rule of law, and there is, the principle of sovereign equality of nations is embedded in everything that we are doing. Otherwise, unilateral preferences, unilateral charities are unlikely to last forever. I think there is a need for us to go back to the basics and champion the idea of international agreements binding on all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can we dig a little bit into the policies, if you want to pitch them? All of you talk quick as the full answer and the questions already asked for, the remarks already made. But I also want to give you look a little bit into the sectors as well, and tell us from your perspective what sectors seem the most promising, or we could expand the links between Africa and the UAE. What does the African continent need the most?
Thank you very much, Dr. Damiana. And it's a pleasure for me to be here from Central Africa. In Central Africa, the partnership, because it's a French-speaking country or a French-speaking region, sometimes we have our traditional partners that are still dominating. But before I go to the question that you just asked, permit me to dive a bit into the policies that I think can be done. The first thing I think that should be done, nobody is willing to invest, to send money in an arena, in an environment where the business environment is not predictable. So the first thing that African government need to do is to enable the business environment to be predictable, encourage transparencies in regulations. That's the first thing they have to do. And after that, it is important to reduce bureaucracy. That's another important thing that they have to do. Enforce contract. And they must align with the African Free Trade Area, because if we continue to implement the policies of the African Free Trade Area, it will permit the UAE to look at Africa not as a segregated nation, to look at Africa not as 54 independent countries, but to look at Africa as a region, and that will permit her to grab a market of more than 1.5 billion individuals. And that too will enable us to increase what I call in economics, economic of scale. And if UAE look at Africa from this viewpoint, and not as isolated countries, I think the economic of scale will be relevant. And the last thing I may be talking about, the policy, is about finance, which is very important. This one goes now to the side of UAE. In my opinion, it is important to create what I call the Industrial Transformation Fund, which will be a dedicated multi-billion-dollar institution that can get funds that are sovereign to state, get funds from multinational development company, get funds from the private sector, and then inject it in agro-industries, inject it in renewable industry. We cannot talk about transformation without creating a veritable institution that will sponsor this transformation. That is what I think from the viewpoint of policy. I have given the policy from the African side and from the side of UAE. Now, moving now to your question, which was based on the sectors of priorities that this corporation need to focus on. I would like to say something that I deem necessary. Africa does not need investors. I repeat again, Africa does not need investors. What Africa needs is transformative partnership. I believe the cooperation between UAE and Africa, the opportunity that we have does not lie on what I call transactional trade, does not lie on what I call commercial trade, but it lies on transformative trade. And Doctor, let me just tell you something. In the last decade, trade was based on Africa exporting raw material and receiving final product. This principle was based on absolute advantage that was developed by Adam Smith and the relative advantage by David Ricardo. But today, in the 21st century, this can work again. That is why in Africa, you see what I call African-centric sentiment rising against the traditional model. So we can take this African-centric sentiment rising against the traditional model as an opportunity for us. And in this case, the sector where we need to focus on, number one sector that I'll be talking about is the agro-industrialization. That one is a good pillar. Why? Africa has more than 60% of uncultivated arable land. Everybody can see it. Now, UAE has a lot of expertise in logistic and food chain. So the coming together, the fusion of this partnership could help in creating agro-industrial industry that will permit to save, one, Africa, to save, two, the Middle East, and to save the world at large. That is a sector that is very important. The next sector, sector number two, that I will be talking about is the renewable energy. Dr. Damaya, can you imagine that 600 million individuals in Africa don't have access to electricity? Whereas Africa has resources, enough resources in wind, enough resources concerning solar. So the synergy should be on how to create industries that will permit the individuals that are lacking in electricity, renewable energy. And my worry is that UAE should not just sponsor solar farms, but should come in so that they should be able, in this partnership, to create solar industry, to create industry that can produce battery, and this will be where the impact will be felt in African economy. Another part that I would like a sector, maybe the last sector, will be on the health sector, health and pharmaceutical. With the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a strong proof that relying on export medicine and vaccine is dangerous. So the partnership can permit this region to come together and to create pharmaceutical industries that will enable security as far as health is concerned. I think I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think that the UAE policies really the obviously not branch the greatness do cover all of these basic sectors and the collaboration in them whenever they exist. So as far as suggestions, it would be important for more and more African countries to negotiate agreements with the UAE. We have already a couple that have materialized. Kenya has its SIPA with the UAE. There's Central African Republic, Mauritius, Congo has been doing the way. Many others are in progress, but those regulations, once they're made and they exist, become then the background for this kind of work that you're talking about. Because I've seen how active, for example, the Emirates Chambers of Commerce are. Once SIPA exists, they put a huge amount of work into creating the business-to-business synergies will do, introducing companies to one another and making this partnership happen. For me, I thought obviously very short and the African good that brings it's essential for good thing with it, yeah, and in the scope. It's also very well up to the without receiving the job 35 for things that may I open the call for the audience to ensure that our bias questions among all here. So please, then I think I could also from where always go on that team. Please have any was good. This clearly strong guys. Like it is what we put through. Nothing is it for anyone? For questions, right? I have more questions, so
that's okay. We can go back to one of mine. I wanted to ask maybe all of you to give me just a very brief answer to the question: how can we
invest that the top help the transcendental space and help, I guess. And that's free, you know. The economy has been rising and the virus might from oil, then goes into that growth of what kind of collaboration. See, this is like still good news for the Emiratis.
I mean, for us, we came a long way. Probably all of us heard about the Dutch disease. So basically you have one product that you rely on, and that affects all of your other industries. I think the UAE is, let's say, a successful case study in escaping that, let's say, method, because we try to diversify our economy away from oil. So a lot of our neighbors could be, you know, classified as oil-based economies, but not the UAE. For us, we started maybe in the early 70s, around 80%, relying on oil-based economy. At the moment, it's less than 20%. So the main driver of the UAE is not the oil sector, is the other non-oil sector. And for us, we focus on different kind of sectors that's going to grow the economy in the future. We have some established industries, construction, let's say, logistics, finance, but there are other industries that could be, let's say, high potential growth in the future. That has to do with technology, AI, and also something we call cluster. So clustering has to do with, combining different industries to have a main, let's say, high value added, export product. So for us, we try to focus on different kind of things in order to have the right infrastructure to build different high value added materials for the UAE. So for us, that has to do with, attracting the right talent and the right investment. For the future, I don't think it has to do with attracting the right, let's say, amount of finance, FDI. I think most, let's say, competitive economies are competing in attracting the right talent. So we have a lot of skilled, people around the world are willing to work in the countries that provide the right infrastructure for them and the right opportunity. So most economies has to do with, if you want to be, let's say, a potential, economy, you have to attract the right talent. So that's one thing. Another thing is let's say, entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs are willing to leave their own country of origin in order to establish their business in other places. And I think in the UAE, we are very successful in that aspect, and that has to do with policies. For the UAE, we have, let's say, introduced two main policies. We could share it with Ethiopia if you like, in case if you want any other, let's say, elaboration. We have two main policies we have introduced in 2020 in order to attract more businesses to the country. We had a mandate at the time for the Ministry of Economy to grow the number of businesses from 500,000 to 1 million. And the trade from 22 trillion dirhams in our currency to 4 trillion. So we want to double the number of businesses and the number of trade. What we did at the time is that we introduced the golden visa. So a lot of entrepreneurs could come to the UAE and be settled in the country for a long time. That's one thing. Another thing is what we call the business law. So previously, you have to have a local partner in the country in order to open your business. That's not the case anymore. So you could have your own business fully operated by you, fully owned by you, whatever nationality you come from, and establish your business in the UAE. And that has grown the number of businesses exponentially in the UAE. We have reached the number 1 million. We were supposed to reach the number of 1 million companies in the UAE by 2030. We already reached it in 2023. And now our minister wants to reach 2 million. So he even doubled our previous target. So having the right policies is very essential to attract the right talent and the right entrepreneurs and the right high net worth individuals. And the UAE is one of the top, let's say, countries in order to attract these kind of individuals. These kind of, let's say, individuals, if they are together in one place, these are the people that are going to drive the economy in the future. So that's very important for us in terms of clustering and in terms of attracting the right talent and the right people. And this kind of policy and having the right policies will improve the overall trade between the UAE and its partners.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good question. I think because of the AFCFTA, as I was mentioning earlier, Africa has already identified a number of sectors, the so-called priority value chains, in which Africa would like to use its scale, the promise of a single market to attract investment. And I think Dr. Fabian already mentioned many of them. Agro-processing being one of them, the pharmaceutical value chain being another one. We often talk about critical minerals, and I think all of us have mentioned it one way or the other, including our speaker at the opening, when he gave that inspiring statement earlier. We talk about Africa's natural resource endowment. It has been mentioned, it's common knowledge. We have been digging out the resource and exporting it raw and then re-importing it back in a processed form. The export of jobs, as we often call it. Mr. Tariq just mentioned, UAE's efforts over the years to diversify away from oil. What is it that we can learn from this experience? I started earlier my intervention with the inspirational value of what the UAE has gone through over the past 6 decades, let's say. It's not, UAE is probably the most successful example, but it's not the only example that has used its resource endowments to diversify the economy. From oil, look at OPEC member states over the years, etc. What is it that we can learn from that experience? When OPEC was created in 1960, I remember doing some research a long time ago as an academic. There were about 5 countries that got together and created it. And their primary purpose was to make sure that they can retain a certain portion of the oil rent so they can invest it in order to diversify their economies. And even at the highest, I don't think the OPEC countries, even when they are 13, 14 countries, I don't think they control more than 40% of the oil market globally in terms of supply. In Africa today, look at the DRC. In cobalt alone, the DRC, one single country supplies up to 70% of the global market, a mineral that's in high demand. And yet, to see a country like the DRC as a price taker on the global market rather than a price setter, then you ask the question, what is missing with us? What is it that we can learn from the experience of the UAE? Indonesia did the same with nickel just over the past 10, 15 years. Using the minerals, extracting, retaining as much of the rent to yourself as possible, so you can invest it in value addition, in processing. Because yes, we can talk about value addition forever, but value addition is not a cheap option. You need the resources to invest. And how do you get those resources? Look at we talked about agro-processing. Look at Ghana and Nigeria, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire alone. They supply, let's say, close to 60-70% of cocoa to the world market. What percentage of the cocoa value chain or value do they retain? And these 2 countries alone, by working together, they can change the price on the global market overnight. What exactly are we doing? In other words, what I'm trying to say here is, yes, I think there is a lot that we can learn from the UAE. UAE investment in the priority regional value chain that I mentioned, I think will be most welcome. The conditions are increasingly becoming suitable. When we talk about the FCFTA, we're not just talking about creating a large market, we're also talking about creating a business-friendly market, a predictable market, a market that is bound by law, where you can't even take governments to court if you have to. This is what we're talking about here. So, yes, we will need all that. But then there is a lot more that we need to do as Africans internally. That's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I do agree with that. There is a lot more opportunity if they join hands and have combined bargaining power. There is no mystery in the fact that even the UAE has started the GCC has created this common market as well to have this better average, at least at early stages of development. Maybe later on that will not be needed, but to get the content could create this kind of synergy, allow for more bargaining power and more markets. Importance. Master Teacher, want to get you into that discussion?
Thank you very much. And if I were to get more granular into the sectors, a couple of perspectives from my side, building up on what the fellow panelists have spoken about. When it comes to creating opportunities for finance to flow and good finance, maybe as you put it, many African countries can work with the UAE to establish mechanisms that can allow capital to flow quicker and better, and also find the right opportunities. I'll share an example. Kenya right now is putting up a national infrastructure fund, which basically is targeted to mobilize several billions of dollars to get into our infrastructure systems. But what is different, we basically are saying that we want to identify projects that are of interest to the private sector that will give you an internal rate of return as we get the economic rate of return. And we see that we can leverage these by maybe doing an investment from privatization proceeds that go up to maybe 25 to 35%, but it should be majority owned by private sector. Why is that important for us? It basically helps us manage execution risk. It helps us manage the structuring and so on and so forth, because private sector tends to be more nimble on these kind of things. So this is something which I would really encourage fellow African countries to sort of work on the modalities that allow you to basically mobilize international finance into key projects in a way that's quite nimble and of interest to the private sector. The second thing is trade in services. Africa has been known to be a continent that has been very commodity dependent. We are exporting about $700 billion from the continent of commodities. But the silent value addition that's happening across the continent, but just not enough, is that we can make a play on trade in services. Many of our economies are at least 50% servicized by now. And in a country like Kenya, at least 45% of our exports are services. Now, one thing I do realize is that not significant effort has gone into creating the infrastructure to allow a country to be very competitive in exporting services, because services are quite invisible. If you look at this bottle of water, I would probably think that there's about 20 or 30% of services that basically go into the cost build-up structure of this water, but we can't see it. So we need to do a lot there. And I do know that the UAE over the last few years has also made a very big play in as far as having a services strategy that should also help the UAE with the exporting. So this is an area whereby I would probably be very keen to see some partnerships coming alongside there. And what are some of the areas that I think we can do? Transport, financial services, professional services, and ICT related services. I think those four could be very interesting for UAE and Africa to work together on. The third thing is the comprehensive economic partnership agreements that the UAE has been rolling out, which the honorable panelist also spoke about. I was deeply humbled to be the chief negotiator for the Kenya UAE Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, just after we had done the EPA with the EU. And I sort of saw a very interesting dynamic that sort of showed me the economic interests and sort of the world view are based on negotiating those two agreements. And one thing that I saw, for example, in the UAE was that the UAE is interested in what I call deep trade agreements. And these are basically agreements that go beyond agreeing on the rules for phytosanitary and sanitary measures and technical issues around goods, but also go into subjects which I think are key for African countries to address if they want to attract more investment. And I'll share one or two examples: digital trade, intellectual property, and those kind of subjects like services and investment. So the more that then we are able to work together to align on that part of trade policy, the more then the risk perception around the continent may evaporate, and then we may also be able to do some of the internal work that needs to be completed in order for that to happen. And to what you mentioned, the FCTA, I like it because it's an example of a deep trade agreement and gets into these issues. Very quickly on the sectors. On renewable, I see lots of opportunities. I see, for example, that the UAE and African countries can work on investments that basically bring the renewable resources on stream. And why is this important? Because the abundance is there, like you mentioned. But in order to do so, we need to connect that renewable energy sector to a user of that sector, such that then you basically create the demand for the use of the renewable energy and connect it hopefully to even an export market that will pay you a premium, whereby the cost build-up structure is high on energy use, and therefore you're able to basically get the credits around having a green product. What are some of the examples? Green steel I think is something which we can sort of work on together. We, for example, are trying to build the nascent steel sector, but we are using a lot of coal and sort of some of these things, and maybe there's different ways of doing it. We're importing it from Tanzania and South Africa. And so, you know, the steel sector, I think, is something that can be developed. I think another one is artificial intelligence and the digital side. If you look at data centers, they need a lot of energy requirements. One of the things that we had to do is that when we had conversations with Microsoft and the UAE to develop data centers in Kenya, it hasn't come on stream yet because we realized that I think we needed, was it about 5,000 megawatts more of energy that we didn't have. And so that was the binding constraint. And if then we're able to, the attraction we had to Microsoft was that we had a green grid and therefore would be able to have a data center that's run on green energy. So that's another example. If I move to the more broader digital side, African countries are making very strong moves in delivering public services with the help of technology and trying to reach parts of the country which previously were underserved because of the difficulties of putting brick and mortar and personnel in areas that may be difficult to reach. So Kenya, we are now running an e-citizen platform, which basically makes available tens and tens of thousands of services, from registering a car, changing your number plate, getting an appointment for getting a passport, and many of these can actually be completed online. We are also using this in our health sector, whereby, for example, we have community health promoters that are basically working with technology to basically make health services available. I think this is an area which is of strong opportunity for the UAE and African countries to leverage technology in a way that enables countries to deliver public services in a cheaper and more effective way.
I think the UAE is the country where I've lived and little for outlet, where the government space brought to another level. It's just spectacular how little you need to build the bureaucracy.
Yes.
The moment is that there in your everyday life. So yeah, the structure is there and the know-how is there. So that's certainly something that the UAE can share expertise on. So
Sure.
I think we've run out of time. I would just want to, for the sake of Patrick, allow the firms to go to and give his final remarks. And we can certainly carry on this discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think based on your question was how can investment from the UAE help in supporting Africa? And in my opinion, investment in itself does not bring industrialization or development. In the old model that has been existing, investment was coiled inside. Now, what can UAE do as something that is different in their investment? And they have been doing it. So what I'm talking about is intensification. Number one, local value addition. In the old model, there was nothing about local value addition and processing. And the UAE intensifying on this will make investment to be different. The second thing that I'll be talking about is technology transfer. Investment is important, but knowledge too is far better important. Investment depreciate, but knowledge appreciate. So I'm thinking that for a project to be signed in the corporation, there must be a deep component about human development and building capacity. In case there is any project without capacity building, that project shouldn't be signed. And if UAE focus on this, it will make the model different from the old model. And the last thing I will be talking about is about ecosystem investment. UAE must not sponsor individual segregated project, but they must be thinking about project that will revive Africa as a whole. Let me give a small example. A port that is constructed is good. But a port in itself does not bring development, except that port is connected with African small, medium-sized enterprises, is connected to an industrial park, is connected to where there are few processing enterprises, such that when a container leaves Africa to the Middle East, that container should be made up of semi-finished product or completely finished product. In that case, the investment will have an impact that is different from the traditional model. Thank you very much.